This is DeFranco. I'm with Construction Safety Experts. We conduct annual crane inspections, signal person, rigger, crane operator training and certification. I also spend a lot of time investigating accidents. On the next slide, this is one accident that I looked at recently that involves contact with the power line. And you can see here there's some trusses that were delivered in proximity to the power line to be set on a home. And the crane operators swung the boom of the machine near the power line. The rigger and person on the ground controlling the lift pulled the load line into the power line, and that electrical current flowed through the load line of the machine, contacted the individual on the ground, and he received some significant injuries, some permanent disabling injuries. And as so often the case, the operator had no injuries whatsoever. When a crane contacts a power line, it acts like a lightning rod we used to have on our homes, and the electrical current's trying to ground itself, and it'll flow through the load line of the machine and the crane itself, and it'll dissipate out the ground gradient, or you'll have direct contact through the load line to the person on the ground if they're touching that load line, and they get the results of that exposure. So definitely want to spend some time on the new crane standards and the responsibilities of everybody involved, from the site supervisors, lift directors, crane operators, how we maintain the safe distances to the power line, and some of those changes. So if we can go to the next slide, you can see there's the Crane and Derrick Advisory Committee. It's referred to as CDAC, if we've heard that before. And they were first assembled in 2003, and they were trying to update some of the crane and rigging standards. And now with all of the accidents and injuries in the media lately, it's kind of promoted them to implement this at this time. And the CDAC committee consisted of manufacturers, users, owners, government, everyone involved with the industry to kind of come up with a better, more user-friendly crane and rigging standard. If we go to the next slide, it's a multi-step process to get a consensus-based document, the new standard that we're talking about. The proposed rule for public comment, the last day for public comment was actually May of this year. And now the next step is going to be to analyze those comments, and by January of 2010 will be the final day to analyze comments. So after that period is when the final rule will be issued. So hopefully it's very soon after January 2010 for the federal standard to be implemented. If we go to the next slide, it's equally important. There's a new federal standard. Also, many states have their own state OSHA plans. So if you're working in any of these, the states listed here, we definitely want to pay attention to the state plans that apply to your work. Maryland, for example, if we look at them, their standard was implemented in March of this year, and they have some specific requirements for riggers, signal persons, crane operators that we're talking about here today. So the federal standards should be implemented in the near future, but some of the state plans have already mandated their requirements. If we go to the next slide, some of the highlights that I want to look at here today with the standard. Talk about today the scope, the definitions, power line safety, inspection requirements. On the next column, operator qualification and certification, some signal person qualification updates, and some training requirements. And you can see all of the highlights of the new standard listed here. If we go to the next slide, the scope, what is covered under the crane standard, a mobile crane, any kind of crawler crane, and again the mobile cranes, wheel-mounted, rough terrain RT crane, industrial cranes such as carry decks, boom trucks. Generally the standards in the past have said, and they'll continue to say, if it's over 2,000-pound capacity, it would fall under the crane requirements. So it doesn't have to be a very large crane to fall under the requirements for inspection, testing, and training that we're talking about here today. If we go to the next slide, there are updates to the operator's certification process. And you can see there's basically 4 options that we can choose from. The most prevalent one is going to be the accredited testing organization. And again, there's also more defined responsibilities for site supervisors, lift directors, signal persons, riggers associated with crane work. If we go to the following slide, look at accredited testing organization. It's administered by a nationally recognized accrediting agency. They basically develop and administer the exams, and there are different tests for different capacity and type of equipment. So everything's controlled, and that's part of the accredited certification process. When we look at the different ways for the operator certification, the standards talk about whether that certification is portable and valid, what is the duration of the certification. The accredited testing organization, it is portable, meaning you can take it from one employer to the next, and it's valid for a 5-year period. At the end of that period, we have a recertification written exam for the operators. If we have an employer qualification program, it's not portable. It stays with the employer, and it's valid for a 5-year period also. And you can see the requirements for the military and the state licensing. Also definitely important that the signal persons are qualified. We can have 2 methods to do that, a third-party evaluator and then also the employer qualified program. Both training segments have to be documented, and the third-party evaluator is portable, and the employer program stays with that particular employer. I do just want to talk about inspections. We typically talk about a daily and annual inspection, and that is still the requirement. So a documented daily inspection, then a more thorough version, the annual crane inspection, also required. Now I do want to get into the power line safety in some more detail here. So the first part of any job would be our hazard analysis. If we have planned the job properly, hopefully someone has asked the questions, are there power lines in the work area? If the answer is yes, then we have to determine the voltage. If we're a crane company and we get to a project and we hadn't planned the work and we notice there's power lines in the work area, then that would be the same step for us. Are there power lines here? Now what is the voltage so that we can maintain the safe distances? We have a work zone established. We need to mark the boundaries, and we would want to mark the boundaries with an elevated flagging system so that it's clearly visible to the operator, or we could have 360 degrees around the crane for the maximum working radius.